So you want us to go back and look at the standards for these?
Part of the reason that we can look at it is I want to see how does that match up, what does our analysis match up with in terms of what the standard is expecting of the kid, and to see what correlations we see on that. So RL 3.1, ask and answer questions and make and support logical inferences to construct meaning from the text.
Right.
So that's what that one's working on. So it is being able to make an inference and being able to answer using the text. So I think both of what we talked about, both being able to go back to the text to review it and being able to visualize, which is an inferring quality, are directly in line with what that standard is talking about. And so if we're teaching a strategy that's going to touch on those things, is that going to meet what the standard's asking? Most definitely. And really, if you look at that for 3.1, and if you look at the progression, 4.1, refer to details and examples in a text when explaining what the text says explicitly and drawing inferences from the text. Really, it's just a little bit deeper dive of what the 3.1 is, and it is, and 3.1 is a deeper dive on what 2.1 is. So the good news is, and I know that a lot of times this part comes up in our conversation about our kids aren't ready for this level of complexity. That may be, but if we're approaching the standards, we're still looking at the younger version of that same standard. So regardless of what grade level, going back and citing the text pretty much goes back to the first standards that they run into for comprehension. So although they may not be able to approach it at that, if we are approaching the standards with it, or if we're looking at this in terms of cross-grade instruction support, we can still be meeting the standards, and we can still be looking at that from just a different level of depth to be able to start looking towards getting that skill in place. Does that make sense?
So go back and look at the standard from the previous grade.
That's the related standard,
Right, so if they don't have that full skill, we may need to look at, well, what's the build up to that? Well, 2.1, ask and answer questions as who, what, where, when, why, and how, and make and support logical inferences to construct meaning from the text. So much like what we talk about when we talk about an IEP goal, literal, and then moving to that abstract. Well, the literal are the who, what, when, where, and then why and how start moving into inference. But we're really moving in complexity from that to where we're talking about here. So approaching the standard with, well, how do you know that? Going back into there and citing it, this is not new for them. So it was just kind of trying to review, I'm trying not to talk over myself or like stumble over my own words. I know that there's always concern about whether our kids are ready for whatever standard we're approaching. But if you look at it, this is just a little bit deeper dive into what they've already been working on anyway. Does that make sense?
So look at giving them maybe less complex text to look at.
No, I would say let's start with where they are. If they're not getting this text review or visualizing, what is he able to do? Is he able to do that in other situations? Is this maybe he needs a review of that information, or does he need some other skills to be ready for that text review and visualization strategy? So let's take Danny for an example. Can Danny visualize a text? Is that something he's demonstrated ability to do?
I think as long as he understands the words and the phrases, because sometimes I think he doesn't understand the phrases.
Okay.
Also, I mean, on that one, let's see. I think that was just a matter of him not understanding the phrases. I think that he needs to be shown how to make it a habit to look back at the text and read it again, and just to kind of see if he didn't understand something.
Testing skill.
Yeah.
That's the point.
Right.
Well, and that's more than a testing skill. I mean, really, citing evidence is a massive thing that we're working on that runs, I mean, K through 12 in terms of the shifts for English language arts standards. I mean, think about citing evidence goes all the way into college when we're having to write papers, right? So if we're starting to do that now and they're starting to practice that now, that's a college and career readiness skill.
That's what we've been doing. That's all I work on, going back to the text.
What's that?
I said that's one of the things that we focus on during our small group instruction when they are back at the table with me is going back. I don't really care that I'm glad that you got the answer correct, but going back in the text and finding the text evidence in order to support your answer.
Don't
They
just be
don't
right,
like it,
prove a
but-
lie.
The way I do that with guided instruction is they all get a highlighter, and we get
Same.
short passages with just a few comprehension questions, and I guide them through it. We do it together. I read it out loud, and then we read through the questions.
Yeah.
We go back in, we highlight where we found the answer, and we put which question
Number
that
it is.
answers.
Same.
And then we go back and answer the question.
One thing that we do is we read the questions first. So then we have the questions in the back of our heads and then read the passage. Go back and do the questions and continue like Smith said.
So do you read the questions first, then read the passage, and then read the questions?
Again.
Again, okay.
As we're answering
And
them.
I do that with my kids, and some of my kids can actually say, stop reading.
They do.
Answer the question and go back to what we're reading.
I've found that for the majority of mine, it's too much information. So just
Keep
to
going
read the
steps.
passage, to read the passage and then read the question and go back and find those words that match is easier
I've
for
got some
them
kids that
than to
can-
read the
yeah.
question, read the passage, read the question. It's just overwhelming for them.
So,
They can find the words, but have no clue what word they found the word. But
Right,
they don't know what they found.
right,
They can match the words, but they still have no clue what the question or
right.
the information is.
well, and that was going to be a question I'd ask, because if I read this question and I had never read this fable, which technically I didn't realize which fable it was referencing the first time I read this question, so it's like, I wonder what's going on in there. Do you think that when we start looking at figurative language and things like that, are they going to be ready to even know what the question is asking before they've gotten some background knowledge with the text? Or do we maybe need to look at a strategy as we move into higher order thinking skill questions? Do we maybe need to think about strategies for attacking the text? And the reason
No, I see. They do need a strategy for attacking text because they're going to see things all the time that they don't understand, they don't know. Phrases that they haven't heard before. And so
You gotta
they
know
have to
that-
learn to go back and say, okay,
That's what
well,
they're looking for.
yeah.
So, and the reason I'm asking this is because that strategy that Jamil is talking about is a strategy that I've used before, and it's a great strategy for literal comprehension questions, right? Because if you say, in the story in line 5, when it talks about blank, that's perfect for that kind of strategy. And so I feel like that's a strategy we definitely need to use. But is that approaching a second grade level of that standard or a third grade level of that standard? Because the second grade's asking who, what, when, where, why, and how, and making some inference. The third grade one is really talking about using text as a citing for being able to answer that. So would that strategy cover everything that you need? I think it covers part of it, but do we maybe need to look at another strategy on top of that? I'm not saying don't do that strategy, I'm saying what can we add to it to enhance it? One strategy that a teacher that I used to work with at the high school level did that was really great was if I did a read aloud, she would have them draw a picture of the story as it was being read. So either they're reading along, or maybe they're listening along but not reading along, and they're drawing a picture of their impression of the story as it goes. And so once they got done with it, that kind of put that movie in their head. Or we had a time when we would go back and say, okay, well, talk about what that movie looks like to you. What's going on in the scene? You're the director of the film. And of course she picked, and granted this is 10th through 12th grade, so it's obviously not appropriate for elementary, but she did an article on cleaning up after a crime scene investigation. Now, you want to talk about a vivid imagination for some of my at-risk kiddos who liked the gorier things anyway. Like they were into it.
I want those kids to do that too.
Yeah, well, don't know that we want to approach it with this one, but the point being is that these kids were painting the picture, they had to direct it and set up the scene, so they had to really put that image in their head. It seems to me the way that Missy was talking about Danny's answer, did Danny paint a picture in his head about what was going on in that story? Because he even had a picture support in that one, right?
Right. But I don't doubt, it doesn't look to me like he went back. I would guess that he didn't go back. I would guess that he wasn't really cognizant of the part of the question that he didn't understand.
Mm-hmm.
Or what was important about that question. which was the mouth.
You see,